on my downhill slide, I ended up making some really poor decisions. This guy I knew, he ended up having some debts he owed, and then he said, "Hey, I got this guy that wants to buy some methamphetamine. If you can get it for me, I could solve all my financial issues." So I ended up stealing a pound of methamphetamine out of the store, the evidence locker, giving it to him. And it was funny that the guy who was going to buy it was an informant, so it never hit the street, and I got arrested the next day.
Yeah, wow.
But that was when God started to work.
Norm, thank you for joining me today. I am looking forward to this conversation. I just mentioned to you a minute ago, I'd like to spend an entire episode on every part of your story, but we can't do that. So I appreciate you coming on and walking through this with us.
Well, I'm grateful to be able to provide my testimony. Thank you.
Let's, when I say the beginning, start wherever you would say is the beginning. You were in law enforcement for many, many years, and a lot of things happened while you were in law enforcement before that. But talk about how you got into that, maybe kind of your upbringing a little bit, and then we'll just kind of move forward from there.
Okay. I grew up an only child here in the Bay Area near San Francisco. And my dad owned an auto repair shop, so I grew up loving cars.
Yeah.
And he always anticipated me, jumping and taking over the business, which I did for a little bit. We were a Christian family, but, like most Christian families in America, we went to church maybe once every 2 years on Christmas, and that was it. So I didn't really know anything about God. And but as I worked in the shop, I realized that this wasn't for me, that there was something greater out there. And it took me a couple of years to figure out what it was, but I finally went on a police ride along. You can actually sign up and ride with a police officer in the car. And it was just awesome. I loved it, and I knew this is my calling. So I had the unfortunate chance to tell my dad that I really didn't want to take over the business, which was really tough. He's old school German, and, it's a family business, and you hand it down to family. He didn't take it very well, but eventually it took about 15 years, and then he finally accepted it. I didn't have a college education at that time, so it was really hard for me to get a job. But I started to go to college, and then there was more interest. But I sent myself to the police academy, and in doing so, they were able to see that I really was serious about this. A lot of people get the job, but they really figure it's not for them. But I was serious about putting my time and money into it. And I just loved it, and I got hired by a local police department, and it was great. I mean, there was never anything in the perspective saying, you will be traumatized by some event.
Yeah.
I mean, I never dealt with death. Like I said, I was the only child in middle class, never dealt with death. I mean, I never saw a cockroach, until I became a police officer. I mean, I know that doesn't sound great, but it's true. I mean, I was never exposed to anything negative. Everything was already peachy keen, and I had no family members die or anything. But I loved it. And I think it worked well for me at the beginning because my father was a military guy, and he always taught me at the very, beginning of life that men don't cry. Men don't talk about their emotions. You don't show emotions. You just ignore it. You shove it down, and that's it. Like, I'm not trying to disparage my dad, but like when I was 16 years old, a best friend of mine died in a motorcycle accident, and I was crying, and he told me to stop crying, and I couldn't, and he basically slapped me upside the head. Said, men don't cry. And then going to the police academy, it's the same thing, right? And I understand it. Don't get me wrong. I do understand it, because you can't go to a call of a violent crime and then sit there and cry. You just can't do that, right? But this is back in the early 80s. So there was never any talk about PTSD, never any talk about how to deal with emotions. There was a 4-hour block in the police academy about job stress, right? Eat right and exercise. That was basically it. And most of us, believed it. But then after about 10 years or so, you finally realize it. So my dad sold the business, and everything was fine there. He had a great retired life. And I felt I was a really good fit because I was able to compartmentalize everything that was going on. And when I started, well, when I had kids, it changed. I had 2 little girls. And then when I saw, my kids as victims at work, that's when it really started to affect me. And I didn't really realize it at first. I mean, I was spent sleepless nights. I had nightmares and stuff. And I really didn't know what to think of it because I had never any training on it. I mean, back then it wasn't even PTSD. It was called shell shock for veterans.
Yeah.
And so I worked about 12 years on both narcotics and traffic and patrol, 3 things in patrol in uniform. And it seemed good besides those things. I mean, I ruined my marriage by really not considering my ex-wife's needs and wants at that time, because you wrap yourself in the job. It's really not even a job. It's your identity.
Yeah.
It's who you are. And that's the biggest problem that we do, is what we end up living the life, right? So in other words, I used to have friends that I used to race cars. I had friends that smoked some marijuana, and just minor little stupid stuff, right? But me, okay, I'm a cop. I can no longer hang out with you, or you got a DUI, so now you're a criminal. I can't associate with you. So this is what the cops that really have a hard time do, is they isolate themselves with their own tribe, right? And then it becomes an us versus them scenario. And that's when it becomes a lot worse, because there's nobody there to ground you. And I didn't realize that at the time, but that's what I was doing. And so I was only hanging out with cops. But then in 1998, I got diagnosed with a neurological disease. It's peripheral neuropathy, like a diabetic, but I'm not diabetic. And then it was complicated by a muscular disease called Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which is the atrophy of the muscles in the extremities. So only about 110,000 people in the whole United States have this. And I turned out to be one of them. Yeah. And what happened was I started getting these big blisters. They call them ulcers on the bottom of your feet, like diabetics get. And we just wouldn't heal. So I had about 35 surgeries starting in 1998. And in 1998, I also, I was tired of dealing with the violence. I was tired of dealing with the death. I mean, I've had SIDS death. I've been to SIDS death. I've been to drownings where I held toddlers in my arms that died and were given a mouth to mouth and they passed, and this is nothing different than any other police officer. I'm not trying to say I experience anything more than anybody else. This is what police officers go through on a daily basis. But I wasn't handling it properly, right? I was compartmentalizing everything, and they call it old school, right? The new guys out there know better, and they seek out some help. But back then, if I were to seek out a counselor and anybody found out about it, that would mean that I was weak. And weakness in law enforcement is a real bad sign, right? Yeah. People will alienate you. They won't go with you to any calls because they're afraid that you'll mess up. So any sign of weakness is a career killer. And so I decided to go to full-time narcotics. And I went to the state of California, which has a narcotics enforcement. It's not there anymore, but they had a full-time narcotics agent. And so I became narcotics agent. And I thought getting away from that type of stress for patrol would be beneficial to me, but it just brought up another stress, and that was child abuse and child endangerment and all the things associated with drug abuse and drug sales. Yeah. But it was at that same time when I got this disease. So I was able to, I lied about the disease too, because I didn't want to lose my new job, right? And I'm like 15 years into my career at this point, and I'm like, well, if they find out that I have all these issues, they might just let me go. And then what am I going to do, right? I mean, that's really the only thing I know. And so I endured all these surgeries, and luckily I was well respected. And each time I had a surgery, I was off for maybe a week. And then they put me on light duty, or allowed me to work light duty. Yeah. So I was behind a desk. I got promoted real quick, and so I was the boss. So it was easy for me to stand behind the desk and to be. So it was equal to a lieutenant. It was called commander. And So I was not handling it very well by thinking to myself, why me? What's going on with me? And I really didn't believe in God at that point, because when I was going through all these things, it's hard to see these evil things happen and believe there's a kind, loving God, right? The two don't connect unless you really know who God is and how he feels about us. But at that point, I knew nothing about God. I knew nothing about Jesus. And so I was a non-believer, basically. Maybe an agnostic, maybe. And so I was going through all that. And what I found that after about 4 years of surgeries, I found that they kept, back then, they gave, in the early 90s, they gave you a lot of opioids, after surgeries. And I found that because neuropathy means I have no feeling in my feet, right? So, but they kept on giving the pills. And I found that by taking the pills, it numbed my emotions. So in other words, instead of having these flashbacks of these reoccurring incidents and having anxiety and panic attacks that I would often have, it kind of just numbed me. And it felt good to not feel. Right. And so that led into a few more pills. Okay. 2 every 4 hours turned into 4 every 2 hours, turned into 8 every, 3 hours. And it turned into an addiction, and I didn't realize it. I thought these are prescription medications. I mean, even though I was a narcotic officer, right? These are prescription medications. So, I'm not doing anything wrong, right? But now I look back and I see, man, I put a lot of people in danger, and I'm so sorry for that, and I regret that so much. But when you're in that state, that mental state where you're just being oppressed by these negative emotions and continually, that you don't seem to care about anything else, right? I isolated. I almost ruined my second marriage. My kids didn't want to come around me, and not because I was violent or anything. It's just because I was a jerk. I turned into a jerk. But anyway, so I was going through that from 98 to the next 10 years. I went through about 35 surgeries on my feet. And then towards about 2007, I think it was, well, my hands started to deteriorate, right? So I had no feeling in my hands, but then they started to curl, you see, and that's how they ended up. I just finished surgery on this hand 4 weeks ago to try to fix it, but obviously they didn't fix it. And you could see all the Band-Aids because I got burned. I burned myself because I don't realize, and I do the cooking at home, and I don't realize I'm touching a hot pot. Right. So I was getting to the point where I had a difficult time manipulating my duty weapon, right? It was hard. The muscle memory left because of the muscles atrophied. And I was going downhill fast. And in this line of work, and it's just not cops, I would consider all first responders, medical personnel, emergency medical personnel, ambulance drivers, your body starts deteriorating and you're unable to do your job anymore. It's a really blow to not only the ego, but the spirit, right? Because that's who you are. It's not just a job. If I would have had the mental attitude of, okay, this is just a job, I can go be a consultant somewhere, which was true. I could have, but that's not the way you think, right? You think, okay, my manhood is gone. I can no longer do my job, which means I'm no longer that person who I was, which means I'm less than a man. I'm weak. All these things come into your mind, and it just messes with your mind so bad, which just stoked the pill use, right? And then the last straw came 2009. 2009, my daughter, she was 25 at the time. She came down with liver tumors. And when we went to the doctor with her, the doctor basically said that she needs to have 3/4 of her liver removed. And the only place that could do it is UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles, because they're experts in it, and there's a 50% survival of the surgery. Well, that sent me into such a downward spiral that I didn't recover from it until after I even went to prison. I was suicidal. I attempted suicide twice. and that was such a selfish thing in itself, right? My daughter needs me, but I'm thinking about killing myself. It's just the crazy thoughts that go through your head. I think that's when you start getting down. I think that's when Satan has his best chances of getting you to really do something stupid. And on my downhill slide, I ended up making some really poor decisions. This guy I knew, we used to be friends. I thought we were friends, but he ended up having some debts he owed. And then he said, hey, I got this guy that wants to buy some methamphetamine. If you can get it for me, I could solve all my financial issues. And this wasn't me. I mean, I was making a lot of money as a lieutenant. I mean, I didn't. But what I did is I did it. So I ended up stealing a pound of methamphetamine out of the store, the evidence locker, giving it to him. And it was funny that the guy who was going to buy it was an informant. So it never hit the street, and I got arrested the next day.
Yeah, wow.
But that was when God started to work. So that's how I wound up leaving the police career.
Man, there's an awful lot there. It's so, in the work that I do outside of this podcast, we work with veterans. The organization that I'm a part of work with veterans, active duty service members, and first responders. And so we have a lot of interaction with those in the first responder community who are dealing with trauma and those kind of things, which is interesting, for a lot of reasons. And I'll come back to that. But my son is a police officer in our town here where I live, and he's been a police officer for a year. And it's almost, I think it's probably better to not know what those in law enforcement deal with if you have a son in law enforcement. Now that I do know it, man, every time I hear a siren or whatever in our town, I think of him and try to find, where is he, But we've had a lot of good conversations, and I think it's been helpful for me for sure, but to him as well, about things that he's seen and things that he's experienced and how to process those things. He has a solid foundation of faith, and that doesn't mean he won't struggle, and I know he will, but it's so different having that foundation, and I think having the relationship that we have than someone like yourself. And I think so many people in law enforcement, in the first responder community, have no framework at all to understand how to deal with, we call it trauma, but I mean, seeing children, killed and the elderly abused and all of the things that happen in the course of a normal day, and then going home to your own family and trying to, love your kids and love your spouse and do your thing and then sleep and then get up tomorrow and go do it all again. Without a foundation of faith, without an understanding of, trauma and its impact and how to process it, there's zero framework to deal with that. And yet we somehow think that it's going to be okay. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think secular people without Christ, they're trying, and I think they're doing a better job today than they were. I left the Marine Corps in 2003. We didn't talk about trauma at all. I came home from combat and my life fell apart, and everybody's like, "What happened to you?" Right? Well, things have changed even in the last 20 years. But how is someone supposed to deal with that if they don't have any context at all, to anything outside of their work?
First of all, thank you for your service. I mean, we appreciate that. This is an age-old problem that I never even knew existed, right? And during my recovery, that's why I became an addiction counselor. So now I'm an addiction counselor at a men's residential facility, because we don't know, and we're not even talking about cops or firemen, veterans. Normal people don't know how to deal with these overwhelming life events, right? And that's what trauma is it's a response from our spirit or our soul, however you want to call it, that is trying to deal with an overwhelming life event. And at first we thought, okay, well, it's combat related. Okay, well, yes, it is. But what if you're a victim of a robbery? You get a gun pointed to your head and, give me your watch or whatever. That's a traumatic event. That's almost a life and death thing also. But then you can all the way go down to what about a divorce in a marriage, right? Where there's contention, there's fighting over the kids. That's a stressful, overwhelming event that a lot of people can have PTSD over, right? And typically we don't associate those smaller things to trauma, right? I have one client who was bitten by a dog at like 8 years old, and he's never really recovered from it. He's so deathly afraid of dogs that he's actually avoided relationships with women because they had dogs, so it profoundly affects your entire life.
Yeah.
So as you get into, so as we get into first responders, veterans, and stuff, I believe in my heart. I think it's changing now. I've been out now for like 18 years, but I believe that the police departments, fire departments, medical emergency veterans, they're not taught about it because they don't want to give us, I don't want to say an out, that's not really right, but they don't give us the training because they try to avoid it, right? They don't want to make us worried about, what's going to happen. But see, that's a different problem. I believe that dealing with emotions and being able to give men, especially, the comfort to be able to talk about these things should be taught early age, like middle school, right? Yeah. Because your son, like you said, he has you to talk to. And not that I didn't have anybody, but I thought I didn't have anybody. What I should have done is I should have went to one of my peers, but at that time the perception was weakness again. So I didn't want to let anybody know that I was suffering. And I'm glad today it's changing. But the cops that I talked to today, they said, yeah, the police departments have this different mission statement out, but it's still the same. There's no, if I were to go to the Employees Assistance Program and say I need to talk to last night I put a gun to my mouth, yep. First call would be to the chief. And rightly so. But what that is, it's detrimental to that officer, right? Because it causes shame and guilt where they're going to take that officer off duty, and then it's even worse, right? Yep. So that's why in my book I try to get the church more involved. I believe the church can play a much bigger role in this, and I do believe that spirituality, and I'm not going to just push the Christian God. I think spirituality is a major benefit to those that are suffering, right? Because it provides that hope, and when you have no hope, that's it. You're done, and that's where I felt. That's why the suicidal ideation came in, is because I felt I had no hope. Nothing was going right. So I do think that we need to talk about it more. I think that we need to get more in-service training, maybe away from the police department. Yeah. I would love to talk to the cops. I'm also a chaplain. I'm trying to go to police departments and fire departments and offer free. I would volunteer to be but they don't want me because I'm a criminal, so they don't want me around. But who best to show them I've been there and done that, right? Don't do what I did, But I think they're afraid of that, I think they look at their own mortality also. When I was going through all these surgeries, so like I said, 35 surgeries. Not once did my supervisor come to me and go, man, what's going on? You all right?
Right.
You think that one of these days in the hospital, he would have came over and go, dude, what's up? Because
35 times.
But no, because I think there's just a fear of their own mortality that, holy crap, if he could do it, maybe, if he could have that, maybe I could have that too. And they don't want nothing to do with it,
How did... Well, tell me your faith story. So in the midst of, kind of that mess, God gets a hold of your life. What were the circumstances around that?
Wow. It's just... I've been arrested. I spent 3 or 4 days in jail, bailed out, and now I'm home just freaking out, right? Because I know what's coming from here, and I'm guilty. There's no mitigating factors except for the drugs, but that's really not. You make your own decisions in life, and I was weak, and I let Anyway, so I'm sitting at home with my wife, and one night my the phone rings, and I answer it, and this guy says, "Hey, my name is Pastor Jeff Kenny, and I'm with a local church. I heard what happened. I'm a friend of your father's. That's how I got your phone number." And I'm like, I don't want to hear about God, right? So I'm on the phone going, yeah. But I was taught to be nice, so I'm not going to just hang up on the guy. So he says, I'd just like to invite you to church, and this is where it is, and we offer counseling if you need it. And I said, okay, not right now. I'm okay, but if I want to, I'll come. Okay, well, can I pray for you before I hang up? I said, sure. And I didn't know anything about prayers, right? Well, he prays the sinner's prayer, which I don't know anything about. But at the end, he says, do you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior? I didn't know what to say. I was half-hearted. Yeah, sure. No problem. So I hung up. I went back to the couch with my wife, and it was something weird. I felt like a weight was like lifting off my shoulder. It wasn't like a lightning bolt, but some weird way I felt better. And she had grown up Catholic, and she says, we never argued about, because she knew my views, right? And she didn't want to get an argument over religion. So she said, maybe that's what's missing out of our life is church. So we decided to go the next week. And of course I dress up because I'm thinking church is like, suit and tie and stuff like that. Yeah. And I went to this church, and it was really like a prison church, right? I mean, everybody had tattoos on their necks, their faces, their hats are on sideways, shorts and thong sandals, and I'm going, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But was the nicest people ever. I don't think they even knew who I was. Didn't feel like the type that watched TV, the news. I was all over the news, but they hugged us. Welcome. Where do you want to sit? You want anything to drink? Can we get you one? I mean, just awesome. And the pastor was great. I mean, he's still my spiritual father today. It was just a great experience. And the more I went, the more I liked it. I started doing Wednesday night men's groups. And so I started to get into it. But I was still on the fence, right? Yeah, I was still on the fence. So what happened was my daughter had to have a biopsy of the liver tumors to determine if they were truly cancerous tumors or not. So we did that through the local hospital here, and everything went pretty well on that. So the next Sunday, we were in church, and the pastor just stops in mid-sermon, and says, God put on my heart to pray for Norm and his daughter, and for her healing. And we had the whole congregation praying, and it was awesome. It was a moving experience. Yeah. 2 weeks after that, we got the results of the scans, or the I just said the biopsy back. And the doctor said, hey, we need to have you do another scan, So okay, we didn't think nothing of it. They do another scan. A couple hours later, we come back, and the doctor, puts up both scans, right? They put up on that lighted wall, and the tumors, the liver comes up like a gray, and the tumors were white, and you could see them all over. And then he put up the one that we did today, and there was nothing on it. It was just gray. Wow. And he goes, I don't know how to explain this. You have normal liver tissue, and there's no tumors. Wow. And I got mad. The angry old man came out of me, and I was starting to yell at him. I said, you don't even understand what you put me through. I mean, I almost killed myself because of this, He goes, no. And he showed me a secondary report from UCLA Medical Center where they sent all the stuff to. They said the same thing. And that's when I realized that God existed. And that's when I realized it was like the filling of the Holy Spirit came like right then, like, wow. This is God's work. And I believe in my heart that God knew that he needed to do something big to get me to believe, right? It wasn't going to just be, hey, you're feeling better. No, he needed to really slap me upside the head to say, hey, I'm here, and this is me. Since that day, I've been fired up for God, and he just played a huge role in my life. I mean, I spent a year in county jail, in a suicide cell, which is horrible. It's like you could touch the walls, and a big window right there where the guard is looking at you 24/7, and you got no contact with anybody. Out of the cell once every 3 days to shower. It was just horrible, but God got me through it, and then when I finally got sentenced and went to prison, they sent me to Dallas, Texas. And I was mad because I'm in California. How's my family going to afford to come to Dallas, Texas? But there was a seminary that came in Dallas, Texas, the only one, right, in the States, that the seminary was teaching counseling and theology. So I ended up getting my master's degree there in theology and counseling. I met a LAPD officer who got himself into a lot of trouble, and he showed me the way to do a spiritual cleansing, and the way he was taught by a pastor. That's what my whole book is about, like a spiritual cleansing. But if I wasn't sent there and learned all this stuff and met him specifically, I wouldn't have been healed, And so I saw God's footprints or handprints in everything. It was just amazing. Then he sent me after 2 years there, I went to a minimum security in Lompoc, California, which is near Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
They had a college come in, teach addiction counseling. So I took the 2-year program there, got my addiction certificate. And then I went to another seminary and got my doctorate in Christian counseling. I mean, everything was just like laid before me. Like, here, this is my plan for you if you choose to follow it. And I did. And ever since then, I've just been on fire for him. And so this isn't really about book sales or anything like that. This is about getting the word out there that God created us and God can heal us. And I went through 3 years of secular counseling for PTSD, and by experts, by ex-police officers, psychiatrists, and there was no healing. I'm not saying they weren't. They were really instrumental in my life, saving my life. I mean, they basically got me out of the suicidal ideation. But the secular way, and this is in addiction counseling too, is how to cope with these things, right? But I believe God heals these things.
That's right.
And that's why I wrote the book. And I haven't had a negative PTSD symptom now for like 12 years. It's just no nightmares, panic attacks, anxiety attacks. Yeah. I'm finally at peace. I mean, I've never felt at peace my entire life. And I think that once you bring Jesus into your life, that's when you get this peace. And I think that's what we're all searching. Some of us search for happiness, but we really should be searching for peace.
That's good. Yeah, that only comes in that relationship with God through Christ. I mean, that's the only place that peace comes from. It's interesting. You said this a little while ago that, faith, just generally, faith is helpful, particularly to people dealing with trauma and those kind of things. And that's true. I mean, that's been studied. It's been researched. So that is, provable. I would say, though, that faith, because it elevates our view beyond our circumstance and ourself, it helps us to understand there's something outside of this situation, is helpful. That gives hope. But if that hope is not found in an eternal God and, an eternal life that comes through knowing Jesus, eventually that hope falls short. And I think that's, that is an important distinction, because faith is helpful. But if your faith doesn't eventually run into the ground of a relationship with Christ, then the Bible talks about building your house on sand. Really, that's what happens. And I think a lot of people, we hear this a lot in our programs. We're a faith-based program, and we hear a lot, I tried faith, it didn't work. Well, your faith just wasn't in the right place, right? And I think that is a significant point, or important point, that needs to be made, is your faith has to be in an eternal God who's bigger than your circumstance and bigger than your situation.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's hard to believe in something that we can't see, right? Sure. But a lot of times that we allow our pain and our suffering that we're maybe going through to overwhelm us to the extent that we don't see the other things that are happening, right? And when we come out of that, we don't look back and see the benefits of it. So I just finished another book. It should be out in the next couple months. God's Purpose in Pain, Why God Allows Suffering. Yeah. And if we can understand that Christianity is the only religion that really provides purpose to the painful events in our lives, right? We never grow unless we go through a traumatic, not a traumatic event, but a difficult event. Yeah. Right. If everything were hunky dory, we think it's us. I used to think it was me. I'm a commander of this narcotics team. I'm a great guy. Guys want to be me. But no, it's all God that makes that way. And when you understand that you are only honed and prepared and taught by adversity, then you can understand, okay, I instead of saying, God, please get me out of this situation, God, what do you want me to learn from it? What do you want me to know about this situation? And when I look back, people don't believe me, but I tell them that if God were to come down right now and say, listen, Norm, I'm going to give you a do-over, right? So the things that you did to get yourself into this I was in prison 8 years. In prison 8 years, we'll do away with that. I say no, because those difficulties there gave me the peace and joy that I have now, right? And the ability to understand what's going on and how to cope and deal with life circumstances. So I wouldn't trade a thing, and those situations honed me.
And I want people to read your new book when it comes out, but that is a question that people have. Hearing your story, I think people could ask the question, why in the world would this guy, even if he believes in God, trust God? Why would he trust a God that allowed him to go through those things? Why would he trust a God who, allows children to be hurt and all these things that we would talk about? And I'm sure the book probably spends a lot of time developing that, but what would you say to that person who's like, I just, if I can believe in God, I don't like him because he allows this to happen. What do you say to that person?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, what do you say to a parent that just lost their child?
Right.
I mean, there is nothing to say, right? You can't say, well, there's a greater purpose. Don't worry about it. No,
right.
No, there's nothing that's going to soothe that parent. But what if, I would never say this to a parent, but what if that child was destined to suffer, with cancer, Parkinson's, whatever the case may be, and this was God's way of lightening that load? I don't know. I'm not God. I can't speak for him, so I don't know. But I do believe that there's a plan and a purpose for everything, even the bad things that happen, even the bad people, because when bad things happen, we say, well, why didn't God stop it? Okay, well, if God stopped it, wouldn't he be in our lives too much, right? Well, do we just want to be robots and be controlled by some entity up in the sky? Evil is here. And ever since the fall, we are born in sin, which means we're separated from God. It's up to us. And I've seen some of your prior podcasts, and you explain it real well, that it's up to us to actually reconnect with him. And we have that choice. You don't have to. I believe in my heart that if you do reconnect with him and you're in fellowship with him, in other words, you're in good standing with him by having no unrepented sin, that things are going to go a lot better. It doesn't mean that things are going to be happy all the time. There's still going to be adversity. And I want people to also understand that we are sinners, right? And that means we just do stupid stuff. Yeah. We hate, we call names, we lie, we cheat, we steal. And a lot of people don't, well, I don't steal. Well, if you're taking a package of paper from work, you're stealing. Sure. But we tend not to think about stuff that way. And that's what I'm talking about. If we just do the right thing, it will be better on us. But human nature is selfishness, right? Human nature is, I know better. No one's going to tell me what to do. And that's when they look at the 10 Commandments and say, I'm not going to follow all these. Why would I get religion to follow? But if you really study the Bible, the only rule in the Bible is to love God. Well, 2 rules: love God and love everyone else. Because if I love you, I can't talk bad behind your back. I can't steal from you. I can't, do bad things to you, get you fired from work. And that's all it is. I wish someone would have told me that earlier, because that's all it's about, is loving one another.
Yeah. No, that's good. Man, there's so much here, Norm. I think your story is so full of hope and help for people, and even seeing, just the fact that all this happens, then you come into relationship with Christ, but you still have to deal with the consequences of those decisions, and in the middle of that, God works in such a powerful way in your life. Man, it's incredible, I think, to talk to people like you who are willing to let even the bad things that happened and the bad decisions that were made really glorify God. And what an incredible testimony. Where can people, so talk about your book and then tell us where people can get your book and maybe what you hope that they'll, walk away with after they get a hold of that.
Well, first of all, I do these podcasts to give people hope, right? Because I believe that everybody has been through some type of overwhelming life event that is keeping them oppressed in some way, right? So maybe your best friend betrayed you some way. If you're still holding on to anger and feeling that you want to get revenge from that person, that's consuming your life. And this is why I became, if you would have known me 15 years ago and said, Norm's going to become an addiction counselor. Come on. Here I am, anti-drug abuse, anti-drug sales. Yeah. And now I'm dealing with drug addicts on a daily basis, Right. It would have never happened. But I see that the majority of the addiction problems out there, alcohol, drugs, whatever it may be, is trauma related, right? We've all been through trauma. We're all holding resentments inside. And unless we deal with those resentments, it's going to haunt us the rest of our lives, right? Because we don't maybe think about it in the forefront, but in the back, okay, what am I going to say? If I see him, what am I going to say to him to get him back? But this consumes our life, right? Yeah. And if you're like me, who's maybe a little bit, I don't want to say weaker, but a little bit more adapt to want to feel better easily, like with some pills or whatever it may be, alcohol, we'll do that. And that's what keeps us in our addiction. So when you deal with those past issues, in other words, you resolve those issues, and the Bible spells it out. So that's what the book is about, how to heal trauma through a biblical perspective. So, and I think everything in the book parallels secular counseling, but it's just a different wording, right? It's biblical. So in secular counseling, they want you to forgive those people that harmed you. And sometimes it's hard. If you have a parent that abused you in some way, how do you forgive that? But you have to, right? Because the Bible says, honor your parents, and if you don't, things will not go well with you. It just says it, right? So you have to forgive your parents. And not only that, but when we hold unforgiveness, it's like a huge weight on our shoulders, right? It's probably not impacting them, our parents or maybe some friends that betrayed us or whatever, but it's on a daily basis, it's hurting us. Yeah. So God knows that forgiving others, and it says in the Bible too, that if you don't forgive others, God will not forgive you. That shows you how important forgiveness is to your well-being. And then we go through other things like anger. We don't want to stay angry overnight. It's okay to be angry, but just release it, right? Deal with it. So we go into the things that benefit healing, the things that are detrimental to healing, how to walk in the Holy Spirit. And I have a whole chapter on why we should believe in God, because this was so important to me because I didn't believe, right? Yep. And when I really studied and really broke down, and I break it down into simple terms an eighth grader could understand, what the sacrifices were for, and why we sacrificed animals, and why Christ is the final sacrifice. Intertwining that, so there's a common thread there. You can see it, and I even go to a little bit of why we should believe that the Bible is accurate, right? I go into the Darwin's theory of evolution, that it takes more faith to believe in evolution than it does to believe God created everything, right? Because I run through all the dinosaurs and the lack of evidence of the other things. So it's really understandable. So I want people to understand it's not fanatics who believe in God or people that are just looking for an outlet. It's smart people that have really examined the evidence that come to God. And that's why I wanted to present that. I'm not an expert in that field, and I relay a lot of books in there saying, hey, go study further. But I want people to understand why they should believe in God and that he is truly there. That's good. And so I believe that it's basically through confession, repentance, and going through all that and getting back into fellowship with God is the important thing, because when we come to God, we're forgiven for all our sins, past, present, and future. But tomorrow, if you commit a sin, do something bad, and you don't confess it, you don't have to ask for forgiveness, but if you don't confess it, that's unrepented sin, which goes on. And unrepented sin, it says in the Bible, blocks God from you. He doesn't hear your prayers, which means it blocks your healing. So to get good with God and to get that peace and joy back in your life, that's why the book is important. And I believe that the next book that comes out, I try to answer these questions. I'm not a scholar, but I look at it from every man's view, right? Well, why this, why that? And I ask these dumb questions that I used to ask all the time. And I believe that I answered most of them. So hopefully some people will be change their attitude towards suffering when they read it.
Yeah, that's good.
And then you can go to my website.
Okay, your website. Yeah. Give me your website real quick.
My website is Christ-centeredhealing.com. And you could get a link to buy the book there through the publisher, and you can learn more about me and what the book talks about in there. Awesome. And then I got Facebook under Christ-Centered Healing, Instagram under Christ-Centered Healing also. Awesome.
Norm Wielsch, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Again, I think we could do probably 3 more episodes, but this was a good snapshot. So thank you for the conversation. Very grateful for that conversation. And man, the power of testimony and the power of story is so hard to argue with. Why do these things happen, and why is it that we have to deal with them? Really, we're not God, and Norm said that. We can't understand it all, but we can trust God in the midst of it. Trust Him that He has a bigger plan and a bigger purpose. And I hope that was an encouragement to you. Please go to his website, find his book. And again, I know that will be a help to you. Maybe you know someone who's struggling with trying to answer some of these questions. That book would be fantastic to help them walk through that, and it would be a great resource for you to pass along. Take some time when you have some time to go to Life Audio, lifeaudio.com. I mention this just about every episode. But Life Audio is the platform that allows this podcast to go out. And on their platform, they have so many other wonderful podcasts. So please go and check that out. And you will be blessed by those great hosts, great conversations, great topics. And I know that will be a benefit to you. Again, thank you so much for watching or listening. And I look forward to talking with you next time. Podcast. So please go and check that out. And you will be blessed by those great hosts, great conversations, great topics. And I know that will be a benefit to you. Again, thank you so much for watching or listening. And I look forward to talking with you next time.